No, I'm all right.
Okay, we good? Okay, we're gonna rock and roll here. We're gonna start with the almond roll. Now this is a cake, a sponge
Make
cake.
yourself bigger.
So the first thing we're gonna do is talk about the cake and then the pan. So the recipe is 3/4 of a cup of sifted cake flour. Once again, whenever, ever you see cake flour, you always sift it before you measure it. A teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 3 extra large eggs, 1 cup of sugar, 1/3 of a cup of water, 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, and 1 teaspoon of almond extract. What's the glaring thing that's missing in this recipe? There is no butter or fat in this recipe. That's what a sponge cake is. Eggs and sugar and flour, and there's no fat. Now, if we were to try to take another recipe that was not a sponge cake and roll it up and then unroll it and then fill it, it doesn't work. You need to do this only with a sponge cake. For the cream, we have 2 cups of heavy cream, 1/2 cup of confectioner's sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, 3 tablespoons of amaretto. We have a cup of raspberry jam. That's going to go on top of the cake. And then sliced or chopped almonds. I'm going to use sliced almonds. Okay, but the recipe for the heavy cream and the confectioner's sugar, this is not the time, if you're out of confectioner's sugar, to grind up some confectioner's sugar in the Cuisinart and think it's going to work. Because this cake, when you fill it and frost it, is going to have to sit for a while. If you don't have a confectioner's sugar, it's not going to work as well because there's cornstarch and confectioner's sugar, and that's what helps it to stay stable. Also, 3 tablespoons of amaretto. If you wanted to switch that up to a different flavor, you could. I have almond in the cake, but you could put vanilla in the cake and then put something like maybe peach in the cream or strawberry, whatever you like. I happen to have received a big bottle of amaretto, and that's why I made up this recipe. So, but remember, you can't do more than 3 tablespoons because if you reduce the percentage of the fat too much, the cream won't whip. Okay, so for the directions. Grease, line with wax paper and grease again in flour a 10 by 15 inch jelly roll pan. Heat the oven to 375. Okay, this is a 10 by 15 inch jelly roll pan. Now, this is a pre-cut sheet of parchment. So if I put this into the pan, you can see it fits with absolutely nothing hanging over on the ends. Absolutely nothing. And when you tip this cake out, you want to be able to hold on to the paper. So we can use wax paper, which will come longer. You can make it a little bit longer than the pan. Can you see that? But this wax paper now is crappy, so we're not using wax paper. I'm going to use, if you have parchment that's big, you can use parchment paper. So this roll of parchment is wide enough. I'm going to make it longer than the pan is, so I have a little bit of overhead. Now I'm going to grease the pan. This is my concoction of flour, Crisco, and oil. It's 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of Crisco, and 1/2 cup of oil. I just beat it together until it's nice and fluffy. And it really is a great spread for greasing pans. It works beautifully. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to pleat the corners so that I have nice, square, sharp, fillionated corners. And I'm going to cut off the extra paper on this side because we're going to use convection to cook this cake. And if you have a really high piece of paper coming up, it kind of thwarts the heat coming over on the top. Okay. I'm going to grease this paper now. And even though there's a little bit of flour in this, I'm going to still flour it a little bit. You can tell if you've missed because you'll be able to see it. Okay. Okay, so see how the flour is coating the pan? Now I'm going to tap out the excess. All right, so our pan is ready. And that's the first thing that you want to do is get your pan ready. Okay, so it says, sift the flour and measure out 3/4 of a cup. Now, I have a triple sifter here, and that means it's gonna sift it 3 times when I just sift it once. If you don't have a triple sifter, you have to sift it 3 times. Why is it important to sift flour, sift cake flour? Because of the way it packs. Cake flour is 22 times finer than regular flour. It packs 25%. And there's no recipe on earth that can handle 25% more flour than the recipe calls for. It's gonna be light and spongy, like the sponge cake is gonna be.
There's a question
Okay.
from Lisa. She asks, can you repeat what you greased with?
Yes, I made a mixture of a cup of flour, a cup of Crisco, and a half a cup of oil. And I beat it on the machine.
What kind of oil?
I use canola oil, but anything but olive oil. You could use Crisco oil, you could use corn oil. It doesn't really matter. It's something that doesn't have any flavor.
I think Stelly's on to shout out to her because she sent that.
Right, she talked about that. She showed me how to do it. Okay, let's get rid of that and save the flour. Throw it back in. Yep. Okay, so now I have we put the flour in here. I'm gonna put the baking powder in here. I'm gonna use a teaspoon of baking powder. Salt. Okay, I'm gonna stir that up. Okay, that's gonna be my flour mixture. And here's the water with the little bit of vanilla and the almond extract. That's my liquid in the cake. Okay, so it says, with the whisk on the KitchenAid, beat the eggs until light and fluffy, then slowly add the sugar. Remove the bowl from the machine. So we're gonna get these light and fluffy. Now I'm putting in a cup of sugar. I have 3/4 of a cup of egg. If you were to put them together and measure them, because the sugar molecules are so enormous and the water molecules are so tiny, they fit inside one another. If I were to take this mixture out right now and measure it, once all the sugar is in, I only have about 1.25 cups. So I want you to see what I'm going to get with good technique. Starting slow, adding the sugar slowly, and then beating the crap out of it. Yep. Now this is the jam that I'm going to be using. This is raspberry jam. Now, if you don't like raspberries, of course, you could use something else. It's nice to have a contrast. So I would say strawberry would be good. You want to use strawberry jam? But if you keep your jam in the refrigerator, what you want to do is either warm it up or stir it a lot, because if this is hard to spread, it's going to tear the cake, because the cake is going to be very, very, very delicate. Now, another thing, when we take this cake out of the oven, we're going to put it on a towel that has been sprinkled with confectioner's sugar. So I'm going to sprinkle, heavily sprinkled. So I'm going to sprinkle this confectioner's sugar so much so that you won't be able to see the design on the towel. That's heavily covered. This is important. Now, this morning, one of the students had a question. She saw a recipe for making a sponge, and instead of rolling it in a towel, you rolled it in a piece of parchment. And that's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Because when you do that, the towel helps to absorb some of the surface moisture of the cake. When you take a cake out of the oven, the moisture is still escaping. If you trap that with the parchment paper and you're going to trap it, the cake is going to be gummy. So that's a very bad idea. So if you see a recipe like that, don't use it. That's terrible, terrible, terrible advice. to go to the book. I'll pay for the policy. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a measurement on the side of this bowl. And I can tell you now, we have about 4 cups of the egg and sugar mixture. This is terrific. Now, what I want to do is keep the air in there. No matter what I do, I want to be very, very careful. So this is the technique we're going to use. Remove the bowl from the machine. Stir together the water and the extracts, and I have done that. Here's my flour mixture. Remove the bowl, stir the water, and add the water dribbles at a time, alternately with the flour, mixing gently with a whisk, as little as possible, but be sure all the flour is wet. So I'm going to add a little bit of flour. I'm going to add a little bit of water. Dribbles at a time means I'm going to run it down the side of the bowl so I don't pour it directly onto the egg, because if I pour it directly onto the egg, it's going to dissolve the sugar and I'm going to lose the air. So I'm going to put in a little bit of flour. Again, I'm going to just dribble the water down the side of the bowl. Not just water, it's water with the extract, so I don't want you to think it's just plain water, it's not. All right, a little more flour. You see what I'm doing? I'm drizzling the water down the side of the bowl like this. It's only a third of a cup of water, so it's not much. Flour. All right, so now, granted, I've added the flour and the water, and I've only gained a little tiny bit in volume, but I haven't lost any of the air. That's what's important. And I'm going to pour this, and I'm going to keep moving the bowl. I'm not going to try to spread it with this, because the more I touch it, the more I'm going to break down the eggs. I'm just going to go like this. See, I'm going to spread it all around. Instead of dumping it in one place and letting it flow, I'm moving the bowl. Because it's so, it's pretty thin batter, it'll flow into the corners. I'm going to bake this for 12 minutes because I'm doing convection, and 12 minutes is enough on convection. If you don't have convection, it's probably going to take 15. Who remembers the point of convection? Save fuel. This is going in the oven.
All right, swing it over here. Pretty good. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do the black and white California salad. Like, couldn't right up with the eyeballs. That's better, and further away is better. Okay, so I did this salad years ago, and I just want to run through some of the ingredients with you. The most of the ingredients can be found in regular grocery store. We did have a little bit of trouble finding a couple of them, but for the most part, in normal times, you can find them in a regular grocery store. So we have jasmine rice, which is a fragrant aromatic rice, which everybody I'm sure is aware of. And this is what it looks like when it's cooked. This is a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 cups of water to 1 cup of rice with a little bit of salt. And I cooked it covered for 20 minutes. Simmered it. Excuse me one sec. then the black rice, we had to actually get the black rice at an Asian market because I don't know what Big Y is doing, but they usually have it. They didn't because they're redoing stuff. But we bought this in bulk at the Asian market in East Haven on Route 80. And you can usually don't have any problem getting it, but it was a little tricky this time of year or whatever. Now this is a 3-to-1 ratio. So I did a half a cup of rice with a cup and a half of water, also with a pinch of salt. And this cooks for a good 30 minutes, okay? And this is what it looks like. Kind of hard to say, but and I'll show you what we're gonna do with that in a minute. Then we have rice wine vinegar, sugar, and salt, and that's gonna be boiled together. You can buy seasoned rice wine vinegar, or you can season it yourself, which is what I'm choosing to do because that way I can control the amount of salt and sugar that goes in. Then we have for vegetables, carrot, cucumber, and scallions, pickled ginger. This I got at Stop and Shop. This is a pickled ginger that they have there. And this is what it looks like out of the jar. Okay, and I'm gonna chop that in a minute. Pickled ginger, sesame seeds, avocados, some wasabi powder. This is what the wasabi powder looks like. And then some sesame oil, olive oil, water. So this bottle of sesame oil we got at an Asian market, but it's easily found in a regular Stop and Shop. This is kind of a large bottle. Sesame oil doesn't really last more than a year, so you don't want to buy too much unless you do a lot of Asian cooking because it will go rancid. But it's way cheaper in Asian markets than it is in Stop and Shop. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is the rice, when it's done, we're going to take it out of the pan and we're going to put it into this baking dish. We're going to spread it out and let it cool. I'm just going to spread that out a little bit like that. And then with the black rice, I'm going to put it into a colander and I'm going to rinse it because this gives off, I don't know if you can see around the edge there, but it's kind of like a purplish color. So I've got a colander in the sink.
Anybody else why you don't cook them together?
So then I'm going to rinse it.
You see the color coming off? It's a deep,
You can see the purple.
it's a deep purple coming off the rice. It's very important to get rid of that because otherwise it'll contaminate.
It'll stain the white rice and everything will just be kind of muddy. So I'm gonna let this go for a second. Yeah, it's amazing.
Coming out of there.
Amazing, yeah.
Okay, now it's becoming pretty clear. So I'm just gonna let it in the sink while I do the rest of the vegetables. So in the meantime, in this pot, I have the rice wine vinegar, the salt, and the sugar. So I'm gonna put this on the heat, and I'm just gonna let that come to a boil so that the sugar and the salt dissolve. And then we're gonna sprinkle it over the rice. But I'll do the vegetables now. We're done with that. Everybody knows what sesame seeds look like. They're toasted.
And the one thing you shouldn't leave out of this recipe, for some reason you don't have an ingredient, the one thing you should not leave out is the sesame seeds. Because this is a meatless meal, and you have rice, 7 amino acids in the rice. Guess where the last one is? In the sesame seeds. You want to make sure that you don't leave out the sesame seeds. Very important to make this a balanced meal.
Yeah, and so the other thing that I also realized today, because I did this recipe years and years ago, is that it's vegan. And it was never my intention back in the day to make something vegan, but it just happens that it is. So it's a really nice dish to make if you are going to be having a vegan. All right, so this is going to go in the bowl. So in the bowl, I already did the cucumbers. So I peeled them, seeded them, and chopped them. And I'm going to do the scallions. Now I had 4 of these enormous scallions. Just a bunch of scallions is fine, but I just had 4, so this is what I'm gonna do, but I'm just gonna cut it down the center. Just chop it finely. Bowl. Then I have an avocado. Okay, so this is already boiling. That's only a quarter cup in there, so it doesn't take much. So I'm just gonna sprinkle this over the rice a little bit. And then with my fingers, I'm just gonna sort of toss that around so all the rice gets seasoned. Sort of loosens up a little bit. And we're just gonna let that sit until we're ready to add it to the salad. Okay, so the avocado. You want an avocado that's ripe, but not like crazy ripe. And I know that it's really hard to time avocados when you buy them, you know, ahead of time. You really don't know if it's going to be dead ripe tomorrow or not for a week. But I'm going on the side of, I guess, underripe. I got really lucky this week with the avocados, so they're all perfect. I'm just going to chop this. Throw it in there. Okay. I already put the sesame seeds in there. I don't know if you can see that. They're on the cucumbers. I've got the ginger. And then the last thing I'm going to do is the carrot. So obviously, when I made this recipe up years and years ago, I had a lot more time on my hands. So the directions for the recipe are to make slices